I am here to present the Office of the Governor's budget. I will try to be quick, but if you have any questions, please feel free to interject at any point in time. First item, I'll start on page 2. This represents the increase that we are asking for statewide pay increases for employees. Want to say thank you to this committee as well. We have consistently been able to support our state employees. We're really proud of the work that they are doing, and I think end of day, we're an organization that's around 50,000 employees. It's over a $50 billion budget, 17 departments, around 125 divisions, and 600 programs. It's a huge enterprise providing a lot of services for the people of the state of Missouri, and we're really proud that we've been able to recruit some of the best and brightest because of the support that you all have provided. Moving on to page 8, if I will, the operating budget. One thing I want to point out here, if anybody's looking at kind of the change in expenditures, at one point in time we did have a position that was called the Chief Operating Officer. I support that position. I think it was a really great position. However, we moved away from that, and then we ended up absorbing some of those responsibilities through other roles within the office. So that is a little bit why you'll see, or the primary reason why there's a little bit of a blip, down and up in our budget in that area in terms of overall expenditures. If we move to page 10, one thing I want to highlight here is when we'd come into office, there was a number of transfers that had been coming over from other departments and agencies. That was something that was flagged for us in the legislature about some concern and questions about why that was happening. We looked into it and agreed and said we thought that we could actually provide a lot more transparency. So what you see reflected here is actually only about a third of what was left. The ones that are here were primarily used to fund our boards and appointments. However, we really tried to use other funds in our office to pay for those first before we tapped into these. So I do want to point out in the FY23 budget, we did not tap into those other funds and left those alone for any other departments. And my understanding with our budget analyst is not on here, but the FY24 is the same. So trying to leave any transfers from those other departments alone. If we jump to page 16, going to the mansion operating expenses, again, if anybody's wondering about why the increase, a lot of that was just because of COVID. So during COVID, the number of events really dropped off. We've really been able to increase that. Actually really proud of the work that the First Lady has done to open up the mansion and make it much more accessible to the public. So they do a number of events that are new, that haven't been done before, just to showcase the beauty of the building that the public owns and operates. So if we then move to page 22, the National Guard, this is something that these are members that come from everyone's districts across the state. They do phenomenal work, and we have really been able to lean on them. These are friends and neighbors from even probably people in this room, especially during COVID. They were unbelievable in the assistance that they provided, not only to us in state government, but really to the communities that you all live in, and we're really proud of that work. The expenditures we've taken from our funds that we have available to that have really decreased, fortunately, because we haven't had to call upon them. But if you are wondering about why there's still some funds that are transferred, we obviously have still had some issues with drought, we've had some issues with flooding, and they've come in a number of areas of case. The other one that I do want to point out to people that maybe is not recognized as much, but we have had some cold spells in the state the last couple years where we've had several days where temperatures have been in single digits or then below freezing for several consecutive days. That is a really dangerous environment. Often we've put forward an executive order, and what we try to utilize with the Guard in those circumstances is they set up and they help assist heating stations, or they really set up around different parts of interstates in the state of Missouri to help stranded motorists. Because if someone would, unfortunately, their car would seize up, engine dies, they run out of gas, they try to get out of that car. It is a really dangerous environment because of the temperatures, and so the National Guard has stepped up in that way too. So we do still have some expenses that we've leaned on in the last couple of years, specifically for that purpose. And then finally, I want to point out the NDI that we do have in our budget. This is a resiliency fund. This is something that has been talked about a couple different years. We have finally decided to go ahead and just put this forward this year. As I look around the room, actually a number of you are probably familiar with some of the natural disasters that we have had, whether it is droughts or floods, because of the parts of the state that you represent. And typically what has happened in the past is the governor's office has come to the legislature and asked for some assistance to kind of help recover from some of these events. And what we are offering up is perhaps an opportunity to just create a fund that we can go ahead and any lapsed funds from the $4 million from the National Guard expenditure that we do have within our budget would go towards some planning. So looking ahead in instances like this. So a number of you are probably familiar, obviously, with some of the flooding that's taken place in your districts. We had a program that we felt like was very successful that we worked through SEMA, where they worked with landowners and levee districts to really try to go through and improve those. We also have a number of privately owned dams around the state that are on for farmland. That's another opportunity. Some of those dams are in pretty poor condition, so we think that that could be an opportunity. And then also in the chairman probably or absolutely knows this better than I do, but in the state of Missouri, obviously, we're really proud of the agriculture background, but a lot of farmers that do row crops have the opportunity to buy insurance. Our livestock farmers do not, and so that ends up being a really big issue, and so things like wells and ponds also become really important access for our livestock industry when we have issues of natural disasters like drought and flood. So this is something that we're hoping to be able to present for the consideration for the committee, if they want so choose, that we can maybe start putting away some money for future planning. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I am happy to take
I
any
appreciate it, Aaron.
questions.
Any questions from the committee? Does not appear so. Thanks for being here.
Excellent.
Appreciate
Thank
what you
you.
guys do. Next up, we've got the Department of Corrections. Trevor?
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Trevor Foley, Acting Director for the Department of Corrections. With me, I have the Department Senior Budget Analyst, Christina Kutenkoop. So our book presentation begins on page 5. This is the department-wide request for the COLA recommended by the governor, 3.2% for all state employees. On page 66, we have another department-wide new decision item request. This is for an operating E&E increase. This is essentially an inflation-based request. We have numerous operating approaches that have been hit hard by inflation over the past few years. The calculation base is just the change in CPI since January of 2020. This only impacts several operating appropriations throughout the department. So that would include our Office of Professional Standards, which supports our field investigators moving across the state, our staff training, offender wages, staff clothing, vehicle replacement, inmate clothing, commodity purchases for the institutions, maintenance and repair, probation and parole field staff. Our administrative E&Es were not included in this request. Those are manageable expenses, but the cost of facilities and field staff has really become unmanageable without an increase. That moves us to page 85. This is the core appropriation for Office of Director staff. This includes our general counsel, public information, constituent services, budget and finance, victim services. The governor recommended no core changes. Takes us to page 103. This is the core appropriation for the Office of Professional Standards. As I mentioned, this is our primary internal investigations unit. This section is divided into 3 units. It's our civil rights unit, our employee conduct unit, and our PREA unit. The PREA unit investigates compliance with federal PREA standards. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 116 is the core appropriation for our federal fund section. The department does not heavily reliant on federal funds, but we do get some, primarily pass-through grants from other state agencies, DESE and DPS, related to education and substance use treatment. We do have a few standalone grants on our own that were competitively awarded for community mental health services. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 124 is the core appropriation for improving community treatment success. This program was initially began as the Justice Reinvestment Treatment Pilot. This provides services for offenders in the community that are at high risk of revocation. We're currently the pilot began in Butler, Boone, and Buchanan counties, has since expanded to Greene, Polk, Camden, Cole, Miller, Pettis, Phelps, Pulaski, and St. Francis. And our expansion efforts in this fiscal year are focusing on Cape Girardeau, Stone, and Taney counties. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 134 is the core appropriation for the population growth pool. These funds are used to support, in the era of our significant staffing shortages as we move staff across the state to help at other facilities. So we still have some facilities where our hiring pools are very strong and we do well. We overhire at those facilities using the flexibility appropriated by the General Assembly and then put those staff on the road to go help at our sites that are not. This pool pays for the cost of those expenses. Governor recommended no court changes. Page 140 is the core appropriation for restitution payments. These are payments that are statutorily provided to individuals who are receive a finding of actual innocence based on DNA evidence. We have 2 individuals currently receiving these payments. Governor recommended no court changes. Page 146 is the core appropriation for the Division of Human Services staff. The Division of Human Services supports our office personnel, training academy, business operations, ADA, FMLA units, our construction and energy management units, audit, employee health, wellness, and safety, our IT liaison to Office of Administration, and our procedures and forms management. Governor recommended no court changes. Page 158 is core appropriation for the expense and equipment of general services. This is the operating E&E that supports our business operations unit and our construction and facilities management units. Governor recommended no court changes. Page 164 is the core appropriation for our fuel and utilities. This includes our electricity, gas, fuel, oil, wood chips, steam, water, and sewer expenses at all of our sites across the state. Governor recommended no court changes. Page 170 is the core appropriation for telecommunication expenses. This is phone and data charges at our work sites across the state. Governor recommended no court changes. Page 176 is the core appropriation for our food section. So this supports contracted food service providers for our institutions across the state and also supports the offender wages for the individuals that work in food service. Governor recommended no court changes. Page 188 is the core appropriation for staff training. This is an expense and equipment fund that supports our 3 regional training academies where all of our staff receive basic and in-service training. Governor recommended no court changes. Also includes the operating funds for the new Academy of Excellence in Cameron. Page 200 is the core appropriation for employee health and safety. These are expense and equipment funds that support our wellness programs and do a lot of our staff wellness efforts around vaccinations, health checks. This also includes funding, thanks to the new decision item from last year, for our trauma response and employee support services. Governor recommended no court changes.
Can you share a little bit about how many people have taken advantage of the program, the
All of
trauma
it?
response?
Oh, trauma
Yeah.
response? So we have 3 regional trauma response specialists. So after a traumatic event at a site, they will go out to the site, provide any immediate clinical assistance they can, and then primarily connect individuals that need outside services. We can get the number on contacts fiscal year to date since we've
Okay.
rolled out the expansion. Would that help?
Yeah, I'd just be
We
curious
also
to know.
support 4 PCISs, which are post-critical incident seminars. And these are seminars we do 4 a year where individuals that have been involved in traumatic events are allowed to come. They bring a spouse or a support person, which is typically a spouse with them. And it's an intensive 3-day event where they work through. And we can get you the participation numbers on those.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I'll do the chairman's job.
Great
If you could
job.
send that to Adam,
Well, Adam left.
he'll make sure that everyone on the committee receives it as
Of course.
well. Thank you.
Page 210 is the core appropriation for our compensatory time pool. This is the appropriation for what I refer to as sunk cost overtime. So it includes holiday time when you run a 24/7 operation, you'll have holiday time. And then when you're required under a settlement, the hoot cell settlement for walking time payments to our staff. That comes out of here. All the rest of our overtime is paid out of the PS appropriations generated by vacancies. Governor recommended no changes. That concludes Book 1. Book 2 is the core appropriation for adult institution staff. This is the central office staff for the Division of Adult Institutions. Also includes our funding for our central transfer authority and our central transfer unit, which are officers that pick up offenders on extraditions and return them to Missouri. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 228 is core appropriation for the institutional expense and equipment pools. These are the appropriations that support the operations of all of our sites and providing clothing or uniforms for staff, clothing for offenders, vehicle replacement department-wide. Governor recommended no core changes. These heavily impacted by the new decision item I discussed earlier. Page 236 is the core appropriation for wage and discharge. These funds pay for offender wages, both the basic wages and then institutional job assignment wages, and also cover the cost for transportation and clothing upon release if the individual needs it. Governor recommended no core changes. Mr. Chairman, the rest of this book, with the exception of one new decision item, are all the institutions. They're pretty much all the same. Would you like me to go through them all?
No, sir.
Thank you. So I would draw your attention to the new decision item on page 268. This is the new decision item for Phase 3 of the prison nursery funding program. This is the operating funding for the program. The bulk of these costs are going to be reentry support dollars for these individuals as they leave the program. Other states that have this program generally get term sentences from these women. And in Missouri has a dynamic in our sentencing law of 120-day sentences. And approximately half of our women that give birth while in custody are in on a 120-day sentence. Therefore, their time spent in the program post-release is going to be probably shorter than individuals on term sentences. That makes us think that the reentry programming side and the support they'll need when they walk out with the baby, sometimes within a month of giving birth, will be significant. So there are dollars in here to support that effort. This is consistent with the fiscal note that was done when the bill passed 2 years ago. Unless there's questions on the institutions, that completes Book 2. Book 3, page 418. This is the core appropriation for the Division of Offender Rehabilitative Service staff. This is the central office staff for the division that supports our academic education, substance use treatment, behavioral health services, medical and mental health services, and Missouri Vocational Enterprises. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 426 is the core appropriation for offender health care. This is contracted medical and mental health care at all of our sites across the state. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 440 is the core appropriation for substance use and recovery services. This supports primarily contracted substance use services at all of our sites. We have treatment programs at 9 of our sites, and then we have a substance use professional at the remaining sites for assessments and program referrals. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 456 is the core appropriation for toxicology. This is the expense and equipment funding that supports our in-house tox lab, which is located in Fulton. So this lab does all of our urinalysis testing for both staff and offenders. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 462 is the core appropriation for academic and career and technical education. So this supports high school equivalency, some higher education, and then all of our career and tech training throughout the department. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 474 is the core appropriation for our reentry service section. So these funds support contracted reentry services that are awarded on competitive bid process across the state. We also have programs focusing in the St. Louis, Springfield, and Kansas City area specific to high-risk offenders coming out on parole, and including some probationers recently. A portion of that program is also funded with a federal grant from our federal section. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 488 is a new decision item recommended by the governor. This is for a transformative workforce academy. 2 years ago, the General Assembly added $300,000 one time to begin this program. It was one time reduced. The General Assembly restored it in FY24 at a $400,000 amount, also one time again. This is the governor's recommendation to continue the program at $750,000 ongoing funding. This would allow the expansion of this academy to approximately half of our work sites for offenders returning to all the major metros in the state. It provides virtual job training, virtual job placement, job coaching services, and then they have a number of second chance employers signed up. Preliminary outcomes of the program have been very good. Page 496 is the core appropriation for Missouri Vocational Enterprises. This is all working capital revolving fund. It is the revolving fund that supports the operation of MBE, which is our prison industries program. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 508 is the core appropriation for the Division of Probation and Parole. So this supports all of the administrative and field staff for the Division of Probation and Parole, including just approximately 1,200 officers and their supervisory chain. Governor recommended no core changes. Takes us to page 520, which is the core appropriation for the Transition Center of St. Louis. This is a diversionary and intervention program. It's a large center in St. Louis. The idea is it provides an alternative to revocation to prison for offenders at risk of revocation. There is a similar one for the Transition Center of Kansas City on page 532. The governor did not recommend core changes in either one. Page 540 is the core appropriation for the DOC Command Center. This is a 24/7 command center that works with warrant issues and works on absconders, escapes, and investigations into absconsions and escapes. Governor recommended no core changes. You can skip 546. That is appropriation that was deleted by reallocation last year. Page 554 is the core appropriation for electronic monitoring. This supports all the community electronic monitoring services the department has for both probationers and parolees. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 564 is core appropriation for an automated low-risk supervision system. This is a contracted system where we move low-risk probationers and parolees in the community into much more of an automated, less staff contact system, allowing the staff to focus their time on moderate and high-risk cases. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 576 is the core appropriation for community supervision centers. There are 6 existing centers. These are essentially smaller versions of the transition centers that exist in Kansas City and St. Louis. They're an intervention for offenders at risk of revocation. In the current year's budget, the General Assembly did appropriate funds to build a 7th center. We're in the southwest corner of the state. We're working on site selection now. So we are down to 2 counties that have expressed an interest in it, and we're working with those 2 now to determine the final site. We hope to know that within another month. Page 586 is the core appropriation for the parole board and their support operations and support staff. The board is a separate entity from the Department of Corrections, but their funding is contained within House Bill 9, and we provide administrative support to the board. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 598 is the core appropriation for cost in criminal cases, commonly referred to as county reimbursement. This supports jail reimbursement, transportation costs, and extradition cost reimbursement to local law enforcement. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 608 is a core appropriation for a feminine hygiene product distribution. 2 years ago, the General Assembly passed statute requiring local jails to ensure that appropriate feminine hygiene products were provided to women in jails, and they made this appropriation and gave it to the department to distribute to all the counties. It's distributed on a pro rata basis based on population. The governor recommended no changes. Page 614 is the core appropriation for the inmate canteen. This is the appropriation that purchases the products for resale and then collects the revenues. It's a revolving fund for the operations of the canteens. Governor recommended no core changes. Page 624 is the core appropriation for the legal expense fund transfer. No core changes. And then page 630. Page 630 is the core appropriation for the hotel settlement funding. Per the terms of the settlement, the state will make 8 annual payments to the settlement. Governor recommended no core changes. And that concludes our book, unless there's any questions.
Thanks, Trevor. Any questions from the committee? Does not appear so. We're adjourned. Thanks for being here.